So welcome to Maimoni Legal's lovely cross-border tax webinar. Chris, tell us a little bit about your background while we're waiting for Ali to join us.
Sure. I'm a Canadian CPA and financial planner. I center my professional expertise around Canadians investing in the USA, and especially popular in the last several years is Canadians actually departing Canada and moving to the USA. So I pretty much work on that full time now, and that's what I'm doing pretty well 24/7 these days.
Right. So you help Canadians who are exiting or planning business or holding real estate in the US, and you help them to strategize the best move forward in terms of whatever their goals are, right?
Yeah, exactly. With proper planning, there's lots and lots you can do, and there's a right solution for everyone. Some people really want to become full-time residents of the US, and there's a set of planning we can do for that. Other people just want to diversify a little. Maybe they want to move a portion of their business to the US. Maybe they want to refinance some Canadian real estate, buy some US side real estate. So there's a good strategy for everyone. And people always need to do what's right for themselves and their families, and that's what we help them with, to sort of tax optimize all of that.
Yeah, and you know what? You've taken care of so many of our clients, and the feedback that I always get from them is that you were really patient, you took your time, you really understood what their needs were, and you really did a great strategy in terms of the next steps moving forward. So we're very fortunate to have you with us, and thank you so much for taking care of past clients, future clients, and everyone down the road, including us as clients as well. Ali, do you want to tell us a little bit about you?
We specialize not only here in the U.S. and the domestic side with our domestic clients, but we've been for a little over 7 years specializing in cross-border. We have a multitude of non-resident clients, specifically Canadians that are coming into the United States, investing, trying to move here. We assist them with becoming tax compliant. We do tax planning, entity, now we consult on the entity structures, making sure you're not double taxed. We have a great relationship with Chris and his firm to make sure all our clients are well equipped on both sides of the border. Because the biggest thing is you want to save on taxes. And that's what we're all here for. We don't want to have to pay Uncle Sam if we don't need to. But right. Obviously within the legal realm.
Right, of course.
And we're excited to be working with everybody. It's been going wonderful, and just gonna keep the train rolling.
So Ali, as an American who has chosen to work mostly with Canadians, what's that like?
Honestly, I always loved Canadians. I'll be very honest with you. I've spent a lot of time in Canada. The Ambassador Bridge, the tunnel is about 15 minutes away from my hometown. Spent a lot of time when I was younger, across the border. I go to Toronto twice a year, I would say. One of my best friends after high school moved out there with his family. His family's grown, between him, his brothers, his sisters. Now he has kids. So we're just, I love Canadians. You guys are, Canadians are so friendly. I always say if I lived in Canada, I could just leave my front door open, and
I don't know about that anymore.
Probably not anymore. Yeah.
Things have changed a little bit.
Right.
Okay, well, thank you again. We've gotten some wonderful feedback from our clients, and thanks for taking time out of your evening to join us tonight. Okay, so Mena, you're an integral part of this because as our immigration attorney, talk to me a little bit about, immigrating, and especially let's talk about estate planning because that goes hand in hand with our topic tonight. So welcome. Sure. And give us a little intro, please.
Okay, sure. So we help mostly Canadians. We can help anyone, but mostly we end up helping Canadians because we're Canadian too. I came down with my mom here, Rocky, about 8 years ago on an E2 myself. I then ended up going to law school and then went back on E2 again. So I guess the natural start would be to start talking about E2. So
Sure.
E2 is mainly what our clients go for because it's quick turnaround time. Usually the clients can get their visa in about 4 to 6 months, depending on how quickly they can get things done. And E2 is an investor visa, so really anyone can do it so long as you meet certain requirements. Doesn't matter on the industry you choose. It can be really any industry as long as it's a legal business. And we're looking at three requirements: a substantial investment, so usually $80,000 or more American, that you're going to invest into either a startup, existing business, franchise, whatever it may be. We're looking for source of funds, so where'd you get the money from? So we have to be able to prove that the money came from a legitimate source. And then we're looking for funds at risk. So we actually have to show the government that you actually spent the money already when we apply for the visa, because they want to make sure that you're actually going to invest the money and not go to the beach. So those are the three requirements. And like I said, 4 to 6 months, you can get the E2 visa. We would prepare you for the interview. It's a pretty seamless process. Once you do get that visa, if you did it with your spouse would get an open work permit. And that means that they can work at any U.S. company. They can basically work like they're American. And that seems to be really intriguing for a lot of Canadians. And then also your kids under the age of 21, they can come with you and they can go to school. So really you can relocate the whole family. The initial visa is issued for a period of 5 years, and then it's renewable for 2-year increments after that, so long as, and indefinitely, so long as the business is generating a profit and you've hired at least one U.S. citizen in the first 5 years. People ask me, well, do they check in on you every year? No, it's only upon renewal. So you have the first 5 years to get that done, and you can continue to renew. But let's say you're like, okay, I don't want to keep renewing every 2 years. I don't want to keep this business forever. How do I get my green card? Well, I know there's been a lot of talk about EB5 recently in the news and everything, and the gold card that Trump was talking about. So I kind of want to debunk that a little bit for you guys. So in terms of the EB5, that's still intact. It's going to be in law until 2027, and they'll vote on it close to the end of 2026. And so if you're interested in doing an EB5 investment, still a fantastic option. We don't know what's going to happen when they vote on it. So we can't really, we don't have a crystal ball. I wish I did, but we don't. So we don't know really what's going to happen in the future with it. But if you're interested in doing it, if you make the investment now until the end of 2026, you can still go forward with EB5. They would have to honor that petition and process it just like all the others that have been submitted in the past. So EB5 is great if you do a regional center investment, which is a government pre-approved project that you would invest $800,000 into. You would meet with a broker. They would go through all the different, and we're doing an EB5 webinar soon, so stay tuned.
March 19th, we're going to talk all about the gold card EB5, and we're going to have some professionals. Yeah.
So it's an $800,000 investment. I like to call it a loan because you're basically lending this money to the project. Based on the project, you usually get your money back in 3 to 5 years, depending on what you chose. There is a return on investment, and the broker will go through different aspects of that and what's involved with that investment. So if it's a regional center in a rural area, it's you can get your green card in 8 to 12 months typically. Other types of investments that are not rural can take 12 to 18 months. So it really depends on what you choose. But a great option if you and your family want to get your green card. Like I said before with E2, if you have a kid under the age of 21, they'll get their green card. Your spouse will get their green card. So it's really a great option. Now the gold card myth, it's not law. It would be impossible to make it a law in 2 weeks. Remember, there's a process to enacting a law. Congress and Senate would have to vote on it. And I did create a video. Maybe some of you saw it on Facebook. So if you haven't, go check that out. But would pretty much be impossible to make that a law and get rid of EB5 in 2 weeks. So don't worry about that.
Yeah, and so with the E2, Mena, there's a couple of cool things that I want to add that a lot of people don't know. You can open a business with a partner. As long as you own 50%, they own 50%. However, the investment has to be double, so $80,000 per family. Another cool feature with the E2 is you can hire E2 employees, essential employees from your country of origin. So if you have people in Canada that you want to have work for you in the US, you can do that. And you don't have to move to the United States. Chris touched on this a little bit. What we're seeing a lot is business owners in Canada are opening a business in the US, and they're doing the E2 so they can travel back and forth. And they're keeping their business in Canada, and their intention is to remain a Canadian resident, but they want to get their US operations going. So there's all sorts of different things that we can do to assist you if you're in that particular situation. So that's great, man. And now talk a little bit before we get into the whole accounting part. I think it's really important because I didn't know this when you didn't know either when we first moved all those years ago. Why is estate planning critical when you move to the US?
Yeah, okay. So we're not really exposed to this as Canadians, so that's why we had no clue what it was when we got here. But in the United States, there's a lot of litigation. So you can basically be sued for pretty much anything here in the US, and everyone kind of knows that the US is like that. So if you are coming here and you're going to buy real estate, or you're going to buy a business, or you're going to buy real estate that you're going to eventually rent out, it's really important that you work with both Chris and I in structuring a plan that's going to protect those assets. So if somebody, for example, is renting from you, they become injured and they sue you, or if you're in a car accident and it's, the other party decides to sue you, you don't want those people to be able to sue you and go after all those assets. And there's a way to kind of go around that, as well as if you pass away or if something happens and you have your family here in the US, you want to make sure that you avoid probate. Probate is a lengthy court process that takes place if you didn't have the proper planning in place. So your assets can be frozen, your kids could have to deal with a lot of headache in order to use those assets or do anything with them. So it's really important that you have that in place, as well as there's healthcare documents that we can put in place for you. So if, God forbid, something should happen to you while you're here in the US, you want to make sure that your loved ones are able to make certain decisions for you and not the state. So we can protect your properties. We can protect any type of investments that you have. We can make sure that you're shielded from probate, that you're not going to go through that awful, or your loved ones aren't going to go through that awful experience when you're no longer here. So all of those things are really important. Sometimes people ask me, oh, well, I have a will in Canada. It's always best that if you're going to be relocating to a new place, you're going to be in Florida, it's always best that you update those documents to be Florida documents. So there's no question whatsoever to their validity or application here.
So if I have a Florida will and then your daughter upsets you and you want to take her out, is that included?
What do you mean, is that included?
If I want to make changes.
Oh, you get a certain number of changes. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. My mom, every time she'd get upset with us, she's like, I go see the lawyer now. And then she'd leave.
We've had some clients do that, like, oh, this week I'm with this person, this week I'm not, put her back, take her off, put her back. So yeah, definitely.
You get a number of like where you can make changes. Just trying to have some fun, Yeah, so estate planning is really important. If you want to have a free consultation with us, we can discuss what we can do. If you meet with Chris's team and he advises you how to best structure, then we can implement that and also put it in place so you're covered both from a tax perspective as well as some protection. Okay, so that's really important. Is there anything else you'd like to say to the people tonight, Anna?
Anything I'd like to say to the people? If you're considering moving and you're scared, just do it. Just do it. It's probably
you work for Nike?
Yes, just do it. You're probably freezing, paying a lot of taxes, and wondering what you're doing there. I was in the same position. I would always tell my Mom, why do we live here? And look, Canada's a beautiful country. It gave us a lot of opportunity, but there's so many things, so many opportunities that exist down here that don't up there, unfortunately. And the longer you wait, the older your kids get, the harder it's going to become for you to kind of live out your sunshine lifestyle. So if you're considering it, just do it.
Yeah, we're going to talk a little bit about the tax differences, but even like the schooling system, Florida now, I mean, I know a lot of people go to Florida, Texas. Florida has school choice now. So if you have a child who's school age and you choose not to put them in the public school, the state of Florida actually gives you, a friend of mine told me they got $8,500 to use to put towards private school. So there's school choice, there's all kinds of scholarships. My son went to undergraduate, all paid through the state of Florida. So there's all kinds of really wonderful benefits for children, for schooling, for work. I mean, you name it. So we're going to touch a little bit more on that as well. Okay, so let's start with our accounting. So Chris, I'm on a call with you. You're the first point of contact, and I want to move to the United States. So what do I have to take into consideration when I'm looking at my Canadian tax situation?
So when I do a consult with people, usually I have them fill out a little checklist to let me know what assets they have in Canada, how they're structured, and we basically center the planning around, what they want to keep, what they might not want to keep, and then how we deal with this dreaded departure tax. I will go out on a limb and say the departure tax, the bark is worse than the bite, as long as you do your planning. Because all of the horror stories come from people who kind of just leave Canada and then they don't do any planning around any of this, and they do end up with quite large tax bills. Whereas I always describe the departure tax as Swiss cheese. It's a general rule with a million exceptions, right? And so if you use the exemptions and the exceptions and deferrals and plan ahead, you can choose to keep your Canadian assets, and that's fine. With planning, and you can also, if you want to wind up your Canadian assets, this is also fine. There's good tax efficient ways to do that too. So regardless of the version of this that you're pursuing, there's a solution for everyone. And I'll maybe take one step back from where you started, which was like, if someone says to me, I'm not sure if this is better or worse, I'd like to do a number crunch and see like, how much am I going to save? I've done that hundreds of times for people, and I'm not going to say it's easy, but we're very skilled at looking at what people have, how much they're making, where their income source is, and so on, and telling them like, this is what you can honestly expect to save and actually quantify it. And to Mena's point, I very much agree with her point that the sooner you do it is the better, typically, because the way the math kind of works out is what might you have to pay or arrange now in order to save quite a bit of money on an annual basis from now till the end of your life. That's kind of that's assuming we're doing this all for financial reasons and not for other personal reasons, right? Like, it's hard to put a price on sunshine. I mean, I'll do it if someone pays me, but it'll be tough to come up with a number, I guess. So, right. But personal benefits and all that aside, things like better healthcare available, you really shouldn't put a price on that. U.S. healthcare can be amazing as long as you've got the right coverage. And then, so oftentimes what people are surprised with is they've heard horror stories, and then I actually crunch out the number, and it's actually not oftentimes all that much for them to leave. And then, if anything, sometimes, and then they can immediately start making more money and saving more tax. It's actually quite incredible and quite a stark difference a lot of the time. So especially if they move to a low tax state like Florida, Texas. These ones are popular not only because of sunshine, but because they have no state tax, right? So in Canada, a person might be paying in Ontario, for instance, 54%, whereas as a Texan, they might be paying only 24%, right? So there's easily 30-point gaps in income tax, like depending on how much money you're making and so on.
So I get a lot of, when I talk to people, so, most Canadians who are making the move, typically they own their own home. So if I'm living in Canada and I sell my principal residence to move to the United States, is there any tax on that principal residence?
In Canada, there's an unlimited principal residence capital gains exemption, as long as you have indeed been using it as a principal for the entire time. There's a couple of declaration forms you have to fill out just to let CRA know that that's what you're doing. And there's penalties for not doing those, but but you can oftentimes selling your home is one of the last steps in the emigration for tax process, because that's when you're, here comes a technical term of the day, severing your residential ties to Canada, right? So oftentimes that's one of the last steps in the process. And maybe I'll put a few people at ease here with one quick point, which is getting an E2 visa doesn't make you an emigrant for tax necessarily. There are people who get the E2 and leave Canada and never come back. There are people who have the E2 who go there a few days of the year and just enough to keep their business humming, whatever that looks like. And so the really great thing about the E2 is you can engineer your tax affairs any which way, mostly just by watching your own habits and behaviors, like your number of days and where you're spending more time and so on. So this is actually a classic example of, you ask the accountant, what's the answer? And he says, well, what do you want the answer to be, right? Not that we monkey around with the forms, but by changing your behaviors, you can engineer any outcome that you're looking for, really.
So if I want to remain a Canadian resident for tax purposes, what does that look like? What do I have to do?
So I should really trademark what I'm about to say. So everyone is familiar with snowbirds, right? We all know, like, they're usually retired, they're older, maybe a little snow on the roof, maybe that's why they're snowbirds, I don't know. But so my term is a working bird, right? So if you're an E2 visa holder and you go to the US a fair bit, but not more than 6 months, right? You're essentially a snowbird that has the right to work while you're in the US.
Perfect.
So really not much changes in terms of, are you a Canadian tax resident, just like those snowbirds, right? They don't become US tax filers because they're in the US 5 months of the year. So if someone really likes the Canadian angle of, I just want to spend 5 months in the US, or roughly 5-6 months cumulatively during a year, that's totally possible, and you don't necessarily have to deal with departure tax or overcomplicate your Canadian affairs if you don't want to, right? So if it's not right for you, you don't have to do that.
Right. And what happens to my business? So let's say I remain in Canada, I open an ice cream shop at the beach, and I'm earning income in the US. What happens then?
So typically you would use a corporate taxation path, right? As opposed to filing a personal return in the US, you would incorporate an entity that is actually taxed like a corporation, and then you would simply leave the proceeds in there. And then you could decide if you want to connect that to something you have in Canada or not. So let's say you're the ice cream king of Chibougamau up in northern Quebec, then where it's always -20. No, I'm just kidding, in case we have any Quebec residents here. So if you own businesses that are of the same nature in Canada, you may want to say, let's have our Canadian co own that US co. You may choose not to organize it that way. It really depends on your long-term plans of, do you want to stay in Canada and make a nice tax-efficient pathway to bring that US money into Canada, if that's where you ultimately want to retire, or do you want to leave more of it in the US and have it operate more independently?
Yeah, so there are so many options, so many different scenarios. And then, like myself, when I moved, the first year I kept track of my time because I wanted to make sure I didn't go over. And then with my accountant at the time, we had decided that my departure day. And then when we picked that day, then going forward, I filed as a US tax resident because my residency was in Canada. I mean, in the United States going forward. So a big part of that plan is important. And sometimes I talk to people and they're like, well, we want to move in June. Well, if you want to move in June, you could do a short return for the first 6 months. You pick your date of exit, and then the rest of the time. And again, you have to adhere to the time spent, right? So even if you moved in June, but you didn't really hit 6 months yet, maybe the first 3 months, you could still maintain your Canadian residency. So it's a matter of understanding how it works, and Chris does a great job of doing that. Was there anything else that you think is really important to kind of let everyone know at this time?
I'll just let people know that maybe in the form of a very brief explanation, is that oftentimes people have heard they pay a lot less in the US, but they don't know what that looks like quantitatively. Right. Canada has a relatively low corporate tax rate, and what I usually refer to as the 5-year problem for entrepreneurs. So if you look at the life cycle of a business owner or a property owner, they buy something or they start a business. For the first little while, they really like that low corporate tax rate. They build up a business, and then they get to the point where they really would like to start enhancing their lifestyle, and they run straight into that 54% Ontario tax rate, right? And so the very short answer I give oftentimes to people is like, in Canada, you can be very successful. It's just hard to live like it. Whereas in the US, those much lower personal rates allow for you to actually take some of those hard-earned gains and translate that into, things like housing and other lifestyle choices, quite frankly. Whereas in Canada, you can save for retirement, you can build your business up, but once you get past a certain point of like some of those things like saving for retirement, it's very, very hard to get your money out in a cost-effective way. And so that sort of just circles back to Mena's original comment, which I fully agree with, which is, you might be really surprised at how little it'll cost you to leave and how much you would save, because that's before we even get into some of the things that Ali might mention, like better business deductions and all this kind of stuff in the US side. We're really just talking about the headline rates right now, but it goes way beyond that in terms of other things you can do to save money in the US.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Okay, Ali, let's talk about the US side. So
Yes.
Most of our clients move, I'd say 90% Florida, and then, about 8 or 9% Texas. But Florida and Texas have the same type of tax structure because we don't pay state tax. So we're only paying federal tax. Can you tell us a little bit about how that works?
Yeah, so Florida and Texas are one of the 9 states with no state income tax. So essentially, you move to one of those states, you're generating your income in Texas or Florida, you're only paying the federal tax rate. That federal tax rate depends on your income threshold. Whatever type of income you're generating in that year is what you'll be taxed on, only on the federal side. So you don't have to do a state of Texas return. You don't have to do a state of Florida return. So right off the bat, you're saving. You're on the state level, only paying federal taxes. So that's a big benefit. In other states with no state income tax, just if some people are curious, Alaska, Nevada, New Hampshire, South Dakota, Tennessee, Washington, Wyoming. So these are all states to consider. I personally think it's either Florida or Texas. So, just because the weather, Florida is at top of my list. I'm here in Michigan suffering, but that's, we had a rough one in this season. But no state income tax is always great, because what ends up happening is, like I said, you're only taxed on the federal level. Now, when you own a business, I know I'm kind of jumping here, but we're going to move into the business realm of things. You have a plethora of business deductions. As long as we have tracking, you always have to make sure you have a business bank account to expense anything for the business, with meals, travel. You also, on rental property, something we have here in the States that I know in Canada, they do not have is depreciation. You get to depreciate the building minus the actual land, and you figure out how much land is based on what the assessors in that county assess the land on. So in a current year, you could be profiting 10,000 in income after all your expenses, but then you have this depreciation expense of an additional 4,000, so you're only paying taxes on 6,000. So there's a lot of benefits on owning a business here in the States. The lower tax rates, obviously the states with no state income tax, and if you want to find out more which other states you would like to go into, or if it's just going to be a Texas or a Florida, you contact us and we would love to have a discussion.
Ali, so if we can just go back to personal taxes. So if I'm making $100,000 on a salary in Florida, we can deduct certain things that we're not allowed to deduct in Canada as an employee. For example, we're allowed to deduct a certain amount of our expense of interest on our principal residence, correct?
Right. So the way it works, is let's just say, if you're married filing jointly, every U.S. taxpayer gets something called a standard deduction. Right off the bat, it's $30,000.
Okay.
So if your property taxes, your mortgage interests, donations, and what's qualified for donations to make in a year is about 10 to 15% of your wages, car tab renewals, and any state taxes that were paid in the prior year, if they exceed the 30,000, then you would be able to do something called an itemized deduction. So anything over. Majority of the time, no one really has interests in property taxes that we really see being that large that's going to exceed the 30,000. But for the most part, every taxpayer married filing jointly, it's 30,000. If you're head of household, you're at 18,000. And then a single filer is at 15,000. It's been going up gradually year in, year out.
So what kind of taxes am I paying if I make $100,000 salary as an employee?
Are you
roughly
single, married filing jointly, or head of household?
Let's just say I'm a single person, just to make it easy.
Yeah, single filers. So if you're making anywhere from 48,000 to 475, up to 103,000, you're taxed at the 22 percentile.
Okay, and then I have some deductions, obviously. So in the end, I'm not really paying 22, right? I'm paying a little bit less.
Well, if you're making 100,000, it's not 22% on 100,000. It's 22% on 100,000 minus single filer minus 14,000. That's what you're paying the 22% on.
Okay, so at the end of the day, what's my nut? Like, what am I cutting a check to the IRS for?
So
Roughly.
if we're going based on what were my calculations here, I said if you, let's just say about 85,000, you're in the 22 percentile. You're paying roughly between, well, you have the taxes that are being taken out of your paycheck, which is FICA tax, which is 15.3%, and then you have federal withholdings. You're looking at a good about 14, a little over 14,000 between FICA and federal taxes.
So on a $100,000 salary, I'm going to have to pay 14,000 in income tax.
Correct.
Correct. So Chris, if I made 100,000 in Canada, again, rough numbers, because you guys didn't really prepare for this. What do you think is, in the same situation, what am I paying?
Blended rate, probably 30 to 40%, somewhere in there, maybe around 34, plus your CPP and your EI. I raised my hand because I'm going to translate what Ali said in American into Canadian.
Yes, please.
So like, number one, you have to think that's 100K USD that Ali's talking, right? So in Canada, that's like 140 or 150, maybe less if we become the Canadian peso here, but based on the way the exchange rate's going. Number two, Ali glossed over something that actually is really amazing that we don't have in Canada. Americans just kind of take a lot of this great stuff for granted. He mentioned married filing jointly, right? So in Canada, they ask you what you are. Like, are you married? Are you single? But each person files their own return, right? So if one person makes 200K and another person makes 20K, there's no way of sort of like blending that out, right? The high person still pays those super high rates. Whereas in the US, you can married filing separately if you want to. But most couples, if they trust each other, quite frankly, will do married filing jointly, because then what they do is they take one big return, double the credits, double the brackets. So then where a married single person could make 200,000, as a family unit, you could make 400,000 at that same rate, right? So if you have an income disparity between two people, you save literally thousands of dollars in taxes because of this. And
Right.
for any Canadian business owners are maybe familiar with what are called the TOSI rules. In Canada, they're constantly on about income splitting with spouses, right? Are
Right.
you able to put your spouse on payroll? Can you justify paying your spouse a dividend? In the US, they don't care. They just say go for it, right? They recognize the family as an economic unit, as opposed to we're all like atomized individuals. And so you can organize your financial affairs as a family if one person makes a bit more and one person makes a bit less and save literally thousands of dollars. And that's kind of what I meant before when I said like, there's all these other things that actually create savings. It's not just the headline rate. I'll give you one more too, which for any business owners is the QBI deduction. Did you want to take a minute and explain that one, Ali?
Yes, the QBI deduction is something that was introduced in Trump's last term. So what the QBI deduction is for any active business. You get, so let's just say you make you had a profit of 100,000 right off the bat, you get 20% QBI deduction, which knocks off 20% of that 100,000. This is very beneficial. We've seen tons of tax savings for business owners, over the years. This is for S corps, realtors, partnerships, Schedule C's, self-employment. So this is something that was introduced and it's working out brilliant for business owners.
So to give a real simple explanation to translate that to Canadian, if you made 100K, really you're not paying tax on 100K, you're paying tax on 80K at those lower rates.
Yeah, because they allow it.
Yeah.
The other thing that was interesting to me, and I really want to put it out there because I was a bit shocked. So if I have a business in Florida and I'm set up as a C Corp or not an LLC, a C Corp, and I put myself on the books as an employee, right? So I'm paying Rocky. And then I'm obviously going to pay personal income tax on whatever I took as a salary. And then what's left in the corporation, we would file a corporate tax return, right?
If it's a C, yeah.
Yeah. So once we've done that, Ali, so let's say there's 100,000 left and we pay tax on it, and that 100,000 is now after tax dollars. Can I touch that money as a person, as an individual?
So at that point, if you're considering yourself a C at this point, right?
Yeah.
And you already paid somebody a salary, and then there's 100,000 left. Yes, you could touch it.
What happens when I touch it? Anything?
So you're paying the 21% corporate tax rate, but then there's also, after you do touch it, there's a dividends rate as well that you're gonna also for taking the dividends out. That's why we always suggest when you're living in the States, you go away from the C and go to an S Corp.
And what's the difference there?
There's a huge difference because an S Corp is a flow through to your personal. So what happens is that 100,000 that you're profiting, you go and you pay the taxes on the personal end, and there's no self-employment tax as well. So what S Corps do is they eliminate self-employment tax. With a C Corp, you have the corporate tax rate at 21%. It doesn't matter if you pay yourself in a wage, you're still, if you're going to take from the 100,000, you're going to get hit with an extra 15 to 20% dividends rate as well, right, on top of that.
So yeah, so with an S Corp, then that doesn't happen. So you pay the corporate tax, and then whatever's left flows through to you.
Well, no, with an S Corp, you don't even pay a corporate tax rate. It just flows right through to your personal.
Okay, so that's what so when I heard that, I was shocked because, in Canada, if you have corporate money, the minute you touch it, it becomes salary, and you end up paying those really high taxes on it, right?
Right.
And
so there's a big difference.
And I'll just color that in a little bit. Non-residents can't have S Corps, so we don't tend to use them a lot. But very similar to that is the LLC flow through.
Right.
So the LLC flow through more or less works exactly the way Ali was just talking about. So an S corp would be for like a pure American. What Canadians tend to do is use the LLC flow through because it has like a tick box election. So if you
Right.
prefer to be treated like a corp, you tick your box, you get treated like a corp. If you want to use what's known as LLC flow through, you untick the box and you say treat me like a flow through. And so, in my opinion, those are absolutely the best ones for Canadians because if you end up moving back to Canada, you just say, go back to treating me like a corp. If you live in the US, you say, treat me like a US resident. For example, there's some talk that they may lower the corporate tax rate in the US at some point. So that may change the math and it might be better to be taxed as a C Corp. And then all you have to do is tick a box. You don't have to like remake your whole corporation or anything
Right.
like that. So,
Which is awesome. You just elect to file, right? As one or the other, and you can go back and forth.
yeah, so you can do whatever's better in any given year, essentially. So if it's better to
Right.
pay your corporate tax than pay yourself, you can do that. Or you can just do what's called flow through. And this is a non-Canadian concept. We don't have LLCs in Canada. So an LLC basically means you get the legal protection of being incorporated with the simplicity of putting the income and expenses on your personal tax return. Um, because if we do a quick 10 seconds on the mathematical difference, in Canada, corp taxes are low and personal taxes are extremely high. So in Canada, the wealth saving strategy is usually leave the money in the company and just take out the bare minimum to survive, right? And try
Right.
to avoid that personal tax. Whereas in the US, it's actually the reverse. You actually end up paying more, sometimes, currently anyway, to pay tax in the corp first, then pay a dividend tax when you pull it out. You actually might end up worse off than if you said, I'm just going to flow this all through and pay it all on my personal taxes, and then they're all considered my tax paid dollars. So that's true now, and it's been true the last probably 10 years or so. Um, but there is a point at which you might want to, the top tax rate in the US is 37%. So if you have a business making like $2 million or something, then you might say, yeah, I'll pay myself 400,000, pay my 20 to 24% personal tax and leave the rest in the corp and pay the 21. And if that rate goes down, that's extra attractive. But the short answer is a good accountant like Ali or myself can help you make the best decision. And
Absolutely.
since I'm sure someone's wondering, can you use flow through in an LLC if you live in Canada? The answer is no, you cannot, because that results in double taxation. So there's lots of potholes. There is a tax treaty between Canada and the US, but there's lots of gaps in it. So you have to be really careful with your setup.
Okay, so a couple of questions. One is E2 renewals in Toronto are only 2 years. My understanding is 5 years. E2 holders not spending a significant amount of time in US, less than 30 days. So I think they want to know about the renewals, which I thought you had touched on, but maybe you can just talk about that
Yeah,
again.
sure. So it's initial 5-year visa. The renewals are only for 2-year increments after that. So the first time, 5 years. After that, every 2. It doesn't matter how long you spend in the US, kind of like what we were talking about with Chris. You can spend the entire time or no time at all. So no residency requirement there.
Okay, so another one said, can we stay out of the US for longer durations on E2? Let's say a year or more if we got employees running the business.
Yes, you don't have to come to the US at all when you have your E2. You can decide where you want to be.
This is a good one too. If a Canadian owns a US rental property under a revocable living trust in the US, would this individual have to file tax as a trust entity or an individual in both US and Canada? I think Chris can take this one.
Sure. So we won't get too far into the trust stuff because that's like a whole 2 hours in itself.
Yeah,
but the simple answer is the US has different versions of trusts. Some of them are simple trusts, some of them are complex trusts. The revocable simple trusts are typically just legal entities that hold title, but they don't have economic activity like bank accounts and stuff. So typically they just get treated as a personally held item, other than to say you get the legal protections that you're looking for with like protecting the liability and avoiding probate and so on. You can in the US set up more complex trusts, which are typically what we think of as Canadians when we say that word is like a formal trust document. You get a trust number, you file trust tax returns, and then the trust has its own tax liability, although it can maybe flow income out to the beneficiaries. The US does have that, but these other revocable trusts are much, much simpler. And typically it just gets treated for tax and financial purposes as if it was a personally held item.
Yeah, and that's what Mena was talking about. There's different kinds of trusts, and they're pretty awesome. I have one for myself. And I slept much better after I created it because I knew everything was perfectly aligned. If you want to set up a call with us to have a consultation, it's a complimentary consultation. We're going to be putting up the email address. It's basically intake@mymoneylegal.com. Okay. Does the E2 visa lead to a green card?
Not directly. So
Right.
you can be on an E2. You can be on an E2 forever as long as your business is profitable. But if you want to transition to a green card, you have to find another route. That's why we're talking about EB5. You can maybe marry an American. Maybe your kids are born here and they sponsor you. Maybe you have other family members that can. Maybe you get sponsored through employment. It does take 2 or 3 years to do so, but maybe that happens. But no, the E2 doesn't directly lead you to a green card.
And
Okay.
and if you're already married, your spouse might not like that one option in there.
Yeah, you never know.
If you're
never
young
know.
and single, that's a great one. If you're already married, then not so much, maybe.
True.
So there is some rumor floating around. There's two rumors. One is Governor DeSantis is looking at getting rid of property tax in Florida.
Heard that, yeah.
Yeah, he's been working on that. What he wants to do instead is put in a sales tax so that people who own property aren't paying for everything, and everyone who comes into the state, contributes based on their spending. And then Mr. Trump has been floating an idea around of eliminating federal tax. Is that a possibility?
And I'm very interested in that. I don't know how that would be possible, to be honest.
Well, he would have to tariff the hell out of Canada if he wants to pay for all that.
He'd have to tariff everybody because the money's got to come from somewhere, right?
Exactly.
I think that's about as likely as Canada becoming the 51st state. So stay on your visa path with Maimoni law. Don't cross your fingers and hope for that one, because that's either that or we'll end up like a territory and we won't be able to vote or all that other stuff anyway too, right? So even when people hear that, it probably still sounds better than it would be. So
I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon. Here's a good one. Can a Canadian just set up a corporation in the US and then work for that corp from Canada? So anyone could come to any state, set up a corporate structure, purchase a business or create a business. You can have employees running it for you. There's no need for a visa. However, you cannot work there. So, and we get a lot of calls, people who have businesses in the United States, and they're crossing the border quite a bit. And then at some point, the border says, hey, you've been coming in a little too frequently. Mm-hmm. Are you working in the United States? And if they think you are, even a little bit, and you can't substantiate it, they may ban you from entry for usually it's about a 5-year ban. So if you want, when COVID was happening, guys, I had my E2 visa and I was able to come into Canada because I'm a citizen, and I was able to enter the US whenever I wanted to. So I had a conversation like this today. Getting the E2 visa set up, we have a lot of clients who have no desire to live here, but they want to open their business and they want to travel freely. They want to be able to work here if they want. They get their social security number once the E2 visa is approved. They can start building credit, and there's things that are available to you as a visa holder that are not available to you as just a visitor. So there's a lot of benefits to it. Yeah.
I will actually go on that for 15 seconds.
Sure.
Trashing Canada Revenue Agency is really easy and popular. The people that don't get trashed enough actually is the banking system in Canada, because in Canada we have very little choice, and business lending for small medium businesses is always oftentimes very limited. So when you're considering which country to go to, don't underestimate actually how much better at times the US banking system is. There's like thousands of different institutions. Once you've got your social security number, that opens up US lending, especially for those who like real estate. Oftentimes you'll get better rates if you have your social security number. And for small business lending, credit cards, all this kind of stuff, that actually alone, in my opinion, accounts for why the US sees so much more small medium growth of business, because not only is it bigger markets, but the banks actually support a lot of that small medium growth. In Canada, it's extremely difficult to get any of that stuff. So even if you have a half decent business in Canada, US expansion just opens up incredible opportunities, especially if you can get funding to expand.
And the other thing too is real estate, right? Like we met with a couple, we filmed a podcast that's going to be coming out soon. And we talked about the differences. I mean, to get a property that cash flows in any of the major cities or the surrounding areas in Canada is virtually impossible. However, there are so many states and so many cities where that is possible. And so, I talked to someone today, I think they're on their 7th home that they've purchased. They've, remodeled them and then rented them out. They're keeping them. That's their kind of their retirement plan. So there's lots of opportunity. You can even get an E2 through real estate by opening a property management company or a short-term rental company or some type of remodeling company. We can assist you with that. So there are a lot of opportunities that are non-existent in the Canadian marketplace that are available here. Does the business have to be successful to get a renewal, Mena?
Has to be profitable. So if you're operating at a loss or just scraping by, they're not going to renew you unless you reinvest funds.
Okay, and what if I live in Canada, but I'm buying rental properties in the US? Well, is it better to buy them under an LLC or C Corp? That's kind of a loaded question, right, Chris? There's so many variables.
The answer would be neither, at least not specifically. Usually we have slightly more complex structures than just simply having one of those.
Right.
Theoretically, you could hold it just in a corp. It would have to be a C corp or an LLC taking the C election, but that's by no means the best way to do it. Typically, we use structures that have more than one entity in it, partly to make it compliant for Canadian tax, partly to make it compliant for US tax, and partly to avoid liability.
Right.
One of the only things that gets a little out of hand in the US comparatively is like it can be, I mean, I got two lawyers here, so I'm not taking shots at anybody, but it can be a litigious society, right? It's more, higher number of lawsuits. Landlord-tenant type claims would potentially hit higher values than they would in Canada. So having more entities structured out to protect your equity in your properties, you would probably take more steps on that as a landlord in the US than you would in Canada.
Okay, thank you. If you have a career
not a shot at lawyers, by the way.
No. If you have a career where you can work from home, can you buy a house towards the 80,000 investment?
No.
A hard no.
So people ask me this all the time, and the simple way to put it is if you could just buy a house and get an E2 visa, well, you're not operating a business, right? So and if that was the case, then every snowbird and everybody would come down here, buy a house, and ask for a visa, right? So they're looking for an investment in a business. So what does that mean? That means that you have to incur reasonable business expenses, reasonable startup expenses. You have to have a physical location, headquarters, an office location, or if you're, for example, a contractor, maybe a contractor's bay or something that's going to show that you can hire workers in the future. One example would be, let's just say you're going to start up a property management company. We'll use that example. And you own a property already. That's going to be one of the properties that you manage in the beginning. You would have to get a physical office space. You'd have to buy equipment. You'd have to incur all the expenses that would be related to starting up a property management company. and take on other clients outside of just your own property.
Yeah, so someone said, what if the house is an Airbnb? It's the same thing, guys. It has to be a business that you're going to potentially hire an employee. You have to have a headquarters. You have to have the property. There have to be people on staff that you're going to bring on.
Reasonable startup expenses.
Right. Someone, Michael says, buy a hotel and live in it. That's a good way around it.
Yeah, you could do that.
That's good, Michael. I like that. Thank you for that. Okay, so I don't know if anyone has any final comments. We tried to get to everyone, but obviously we can't.
I wanted to make one comment. The thing that Chris was just explaining, right, about the LLCs owning your rental properties. That's, Chris, just to clarify, that's if you are still living in Canada, right? That's to protect you from the Canadian side, right?
So that's part of it. So sometimes people will use more elaborate structures that involve like an LP and a GP because the general partner will take the liability for the group. That one tends to be used especially if you have investors and so on, because then you can have limited partners and a general partner that's actually taking all the risk. Sometimes we'll even elaborate that out a little further so that it kind of chops up who owns the equity versus who owns the title versus who's responsible for the actual partnership. As an American, it would be a bit more of an option if you live in the States to only use an LLC. It wouldn't be wrong. There might be more that you could do to protect yourself, but it wouldn't be wrong. If you're in Canada, then if it's taking the C Corp election, that might be okay, but it would be very, very tax inefficient. And if you're trying to use LLC flow through the way an American would, then you're just wrong and you're going to get double taxed. So there's much better ways to do it, I'll say. Better for avoiding double tax.
And that's where you come in, right?
Yeah.
Right.
And somebody was asking in here too if Ali and I, we are colleagues if we didn't make that clear. So you can treat Ali and I like one firm.
Right. And what happens is whenever we talk, we have clients who are going to engage us for whatever visa it is. We strongly recommend that they have a 1-hour consultation with Chris and his team. And in that consultation, like he said, he'll send you a form. You fill out some initial information. That way he knows when he meets with you, goes through all the information with you one-on-one, personalized. And then at the end, we'll provide you with a strategy to the best way to set yourself up based on what you're doing, where you want to live, et cetera, et cetera. If you're looking to do a consultation with them, please just email us, intake@mimonilegal.com. If you're looking to get your taxes filed, because tax season is coming, in the US, it's April 15th. In Canada, it's the end of April. These gentlemen do a fine job of taking care of you on both sides as well. And yeah, it would be one intake call with them. They would set you up in terms of what you need, and they'd be able to get everything done for you. Okay, let's show the CP24 commercial because I think it's kind of cool.
Absolutely.
Matters with a 100% money-back guarantee on the E2 visa. Let's make your move easy. Visit movetotheusa.ca. That's movetotheusa.ca.
What do you think, Chris? First time seeing it?
I like it.
That's fantastic. You know, I think I might actually choose Florida over Michigan based on that commercial.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun filming it.
Sorry.
It's airing on CP24. Oh, we got some applause. Thank you, guys.
I wouldn't allow you in Michigan, Chris. I would say Florida. Just go there.
Yeah, I was going to say, no offense, Ali. We'll both go to Florida.
Yeah, so if you go to the movetotheusa.ca, there's our Calendly link is there. If you want to book a free call with us to talk about your options as they pertain to visas and different ways to get to the US, please use that. If you want to get connected to the guys here for your accounting, please email us intake@mimonilegal.com. If you're looking to do a free consultation for estate planning, just email intake@mimonilegal.com as well, and we'll take care of you from there. Was there anything else we want to say before we go? We have a beautiful Facebook group community. I think we're at 73,000 now, Victoria. We got to update the numbers.
Yes, we do.
You're welcome to join that group. We connect quite a bit. We share stories. People, it's fun. It's a fun group. Last week we had our first networking event here in South Florida. That was a great time. And so we're really looking forward to helping many of you with some of the awesome professionals that we have working with us. We have our immigration attorney, Mena Maimoni. We have Ali and Christopher, cross-border CPAs that have helped and are going to continue to help. And you've got me. I'm, what do they call me again? Mother at law.
Senior business manager.
I'm the senior business manager here at Maimoni Legal. And if you can't tell, I love talking with people and getting right in there. So thank you so much for joining us tonight. Chris,
I
Ali.
do have one announcement that I'd like to make.
Yes, please. What
My
is it?
little brother Peter was accepted to law school, the same law school that I went to. And so stay tuned. You're going to have another Maimoni attorney.
I don't know if they can handle that. It's like, because I'm doing that so I can give him my office and hit the beach.
And she's a professional at making attorneys.
Yeah.
That's mom's retirement plan.
Yeah. Sometimes people come to the firm and they're like, "Are you an attorney?" I say, "No, I just give birth to attorneys. That's my role. That's my role in life."
Not bad.
Anyway,
not bad.
thank you for the lovely compliments. Everyone's saying such wonderful things.
Yes.
I'll leave it with you to say goodbye.
Well, goodbye,
Good night.
everyone. And
Good night, everybody.
if you enjoyed this
Bye.
webinar, don't forget to join us for March 19th webinar about the gold visa and the future of EB5. It's going to be at 7:30, so mark your calendars. We're going to be blasting it out, so keep your eyes out.